All right. Well, welcome to today's study. We're going to be talking about something that I hope is not too controversial for people. I hope it doesn't elicit some strong responses. I know when I do bring up controversial things, my only hope is that people will, if they do interact, that they'll do so in light of the arguments that I set out, and yeah, then I have zero problem with people disagreeing. And I know on this topic there's going to be some disagreement, and that's fine. Let's get right into it. So I welcome you here. Thank you for coming. This is the Tale Lege Ministries podcast, YouTube, and the YouTube channel and podcast. That Genesis 3:16 it's one of those texts that people will often quote as though the meaning is already settled. The text says, "Your desire shall be contrary, or shall be for your husband, but he shall rule over you," right? That's Genesis 3:16. For some, that right there will just settle the matter altogether. The woman's desire is a desire to control her husband. And then Genesis 4 verse 7 becomes a controlling parallel. And the verse is sort of read primarily as a struggle for like mastery within the marriage on the woman's part, right? And then for other people, the word desire points in a completely different direction. They argue that it speaks of longing, attachment, or some sort of dependence. Now, they point out that the same Hebrew word appears in the book of Song of Solomon in chapter 7, verse 10. And there it'll be presented as a positive, romantic sort of thing. And it's not intending to be domination. So I think both readings are seeing something important, actually. I think the control view is what we can call it that. It's right to notice that Genesis 3:16 is judgment. This is not an innocent setting. Sin has entered the world, and the relationship between the man and the woman is now marked by conflict. It's now marked by disorder and sort of pain, right? Now, the longing view is right to warn us against making the word desire automatically sort of mean control. The Hebrew word teshoka, it does not carry that sort of meaning every single time it appears. Now, Song of Solomon, it shows that desire can be affectionate and it can be relational. But here's the thing, right? I do not think that we can adopt either view wholesale. I think the control view can narrow the verse to the woman's psychology and make the problem mainly about her desire to sort of master the man, right? But Genesis 3 is dealing with more than just female motivations of a created relationship. Now, the longing view by itself, it can also fall short. I think if desire means just longing, then we still have to remember where that longing appears in the text. It appears in a judgment text. So this cannot be treated as an ordinary romantic longing or simple just marital attachment. It's a longing that is existing inside of a fractured world. It's a longing that's now shaped by sin and pain and distorted relationship. And that's why I think this discussion is a good use of my time. And what I don't want to do is dismiss the lexical debate. I think the Hebrew word matters. And I'm not pretending that Genesis 4 verse 7 is not a good parallel. I think it's an absolutely serious parallel. And I'm also not denying that desire can include longing, because as I've already mentioned, it can, right? But with all that said, Genesis 3:16 is not the beginning of the story, is it? It is the breaking point of a story that is already being told. Because before there is a curse in the text, there's creation. Before there is rule over the woman, we see that there is ruling over creation, and they're doing so together. Before we see disordered or desire sort of represented in the text, there is a woman created as a corresponding helper. She's not a rival. She's not an afterthought in the text. She is not presented as a threat to the man, but as the necessary partner in the vocation that God has given to humanity. So here's my argument up front, and I'll summarize it at the end of this. Genesis 3:16 is not primarily defining the woman's desire as a sinister attempt on her part to control her husband, but neither is it describing longing as though that longing remains untouched by sin. Rather, what I think is happening in Genesis 3:16 is this. It's describing the distortion of the creational partnership that's established in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. The woman's desire becomes disordered. The man's rule becomes distorted as well. And together, these things, they represent the reality of the fractured relationship through which the male and female were called to image God in the world. So that relationship is now fractured. So the question I want to ask is not merely, does desire mean control or does it mean longing? I want to move beyond that. I want you guys to move beyond that into a sort of more deeper question. And that is this: what has happened to the partnership that God has created? That's the question we're going to be discussing here. And so, as is my custom, I have a slide deck for you because I could have my face up here, but why have that when we can have, let me remove this. Why have that when we can have this? There we go, right? I want to have something visual up there and it's not my face. I'd rather have something in front of you. But thank you for coming. I really appreciate you guys coming. Let me go ahead and I got to see who's in the comments here. I see Steph. Hey, thank you, Sister Steph. Glad to see you here and others that are waiting in the wings here, right? Now, let's talk about where the story begins. Now, a lot of these things, you're going to be like, hey, I know this, I've heard this before, but let me walk the argument out for you because there's a point as to why I'm going to be mentioning all these things. Actively constructive of the argument. And as I lay it out, you'll see why. What I'm trying to do right now is show you my math, essentially, my exegetical, my hermeneutical math. That way you can see it and go, hey, man, that's some good math, or Rick, that math sucked. And so I want to lay it out here so that I can be scrutinized. And maybe you might see my point as well. But let's begin in Genesis 1, right? Genesis 1 says this: so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Now, then God blesses them, and he says this: be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion. That's Genesis 1, verse 28. Now, let's infer some things off of these two texts that we've just mentioned here, right? Now, let's notice the corporate nature of the commissions that we see in the text here. We see that God blesses them. God speaks to them. God gives dominion to them. What's up, Jay? How you doing, bro? And Jenny, God bless you guys. Thank you guys for coming, right? We're right at the beginning of the presentation here, right? We just discussed how Genesis 1, that the commission of the first commission in the text of the be fruitful and multiply, and the commissioning of the Imago Dei, and how that describes and is descriptive of their vocation. That's what we were just talking about. And so we're saying here, what I was just covering, was that these blessings, this commission, was given to them, not him. Right? Now, the man and the woman are both included in the image of God here, right? They are both included in the vocation that we see given to humanity. They are both called to fill, to subdue, to rule, and to do all of this under God, right? That's what we see in the text. I think you could follow me when I put it that way, right? And when we get to Genesis 2, though, what it does is it slows the story down. And what it does is it shows us how this vocation is to be lived out. And we see in Genesis 2:15 that it says this: God places the man in the garden to work it and keep it. Now, those two words matter significantly. And if you've been around me in Genesis studies, I mention Avad and Shamar a lot, but it's very significant to this particular articulation of my argument here, right? Now, the Hebrew words here, again, they're very significant, but they are avad and shamar here, right? Now, avad can mean to work. It can mean to serve, cultivate, or worship. Now, they can mean all of these different things. Now, shamar, on the other hand, it can mean to keep, guard, watch, or preserve. Now, these verbs, you'll see them associated elsewhere in the Torah with the priests, the Levites in particular. They are the ones who avad and shamar. This is also the same set of words that are used in association with the Exodus story in particular. When Moses goes to Pharaoh and says to him, "Let my son Israel go that he may serve me," is what it will say, or it might even say in some of your translations that he may serve me. It is the Hebrew verb avad. And so my point in saying all this is that I think that these words here together in the context of Genesis chapters 1 and 2, particularly in 2, what they show is that Adam's task is not merely agricultural. He's not simply landscaping Eden. What he's doing is he's serving and he's guarding sacred space under God's authority. Now, what this means is that Adam's vocation, again, it's priestly and creational. He is called to cultivate what God has made and guard what God has entrusted. And then immediately after this, what we see in the text is God saying this: "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." Now, that sequence is significant. And I just want to slow us down and show us why that is significant here, right? That the woman is created after the vocation is given. But she is created because the vocation cannot be fulfilled by the man in isolation. She is not introduced as a decoration to the story. She is not introduced as a private companion detached from Adam's calling. She is the corresponding helper within the very vocation that God has assigned them. Now, when we see in Genesis 2, when it calls her the Azer Kenegdo, right? You see it on the screen there for you, right? We should hear this in relation to Adam's task to work and to keep, to avad and shamar. This is in relation to that, because she is the necessary partner in the human calling to serve, to guard, to cultivate, and to extend God's ordered creation. She is the one who corresponds to him. She is bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh. She is his partner in the shared vocation that's given in Genesis 1. Even the word used for what God takes from the man reinforces my argument here, right? Now, let me show you why. In Genesis 2, verses 21 through 22, it says that God took one of the man's selah and built the woman. Now, the word selah sounds like the word that I'm pulling from in the Psalms, right? But it is not the same word. Selah is a different word. Now, scholars aren't really precisely accurate, I wouldn't say. They don't really know what Selah in the Psalms means. They have a general idea, but it's debatable. But Selah that I'm talking about has a sort of like a silent T sound in front of it, and completely different word, but it sounds the same, right? But in Genesis 21 or Genesis 2, verse 21 through 22, the word for rib there is Selah. And so that's the point right now. Like I've said, that many English translations, they'll render the word Selah as rib. And that's really the way most of us have heard this story. But the Hebrew word Selah, it more commonly means side. It is used elsewhere in the Old Testament for the side of something, including the side of the ark, the the side of the tabernacle, the north side, or this side of the temple structure. That's what it sort of uses. Now, the term's usage in the Old Testament is almost entirely or exclusively architectural, right? And with its only anatomical usage in this text in Genesis 2. That's the only time it's ever used to indicate something anatomical. The rest of them are architectural usages, right? Or geographical or sort of locational, directional idea there in relation to a building. Now, and this is why this matters here, right? The text is not presenting the woman as a detachable accessory. She's not detachable from the man in that sense. She is taken from his side. She shares his substance. She corresponds to him. She stands beside him. Now, doesn't it start to make sense why he says that she is described as the Ezer Kenedgo, the helper fit for him, right? Now, I don't want to overstate my point, though, right? The meaning of Selah by itself, it does not prove my whole argument, but some could still translate this word as rib and affirm the same theological conclusion. But when the word is read sort of in the flow of Genesis 2, what it does is it reinforces the larger picture that I'm trying to paint for you in your mind. The woman is not created from the dust as a separate creature unrelated to the man. She is not created from his head, maybe in order sort of to rule over him, right? She's not created from his feet, maybe to be trampled by him. She's taken from his side as one who corresponds to him in this shared human vocation task. That is why Adam will respond like this. This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, in verse 23. His response is not domination. Do you notice it? There's nothing domineering over here in this portion of the text. What's happening is recognition. And here's how I know it's recognition, because of the other Hebrew word in this text that's significant. Now, let me point it out for you. That is the word tardema. Now, this word helps my argument because in Genesis 2, verse 21, it says, so the Lord God caused a deep sleep, a tardema, to fall upon the man, and while he slept, took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. Now, the Hebrew word for deep sleep is tardema. This is not an ordinary sleep. That's a different word. It comes from the same root. That word, forget what it is. I think it's radim. I think that's what it is. But it's a different word altogether. It comes from the same root of tardema, though, the same verbal root, but it's not the same word. So this is not an ordinary sleep. In the Old Testament, tardema often appears in moments where God is the primary actor and the human person is passive. Now, you may recall in Abram in Genesis 15 in particular. Now, I'm also going to survey all the 7 times that this word is used in the text, and you'll see my point here in the majority usage of the word, why I'm making this point about how this deep sleep indicates a recognition on Adam's part here, right? But you may recall in Genesis 15, this word is used. You may not have known it, but it'll say that God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Abram. And in that deep sleep, what does Abram see? He gets a revelation. He gets a vision of the future. So this deep sleep is one of the ways in which either God imposes himself on the faculties of humanity in order to, render them, I guess, unconscious in a sense, but also to render them unconscious so that he can reveal something to them, right? And let me just show you what that is here, right? Because I've made this claim. Let me show you why I'm making it. Now, I've already talked about the 2 usages. You see the first one in Genesis 2. You see the next one in Genesis 15. So there's 2 of them in the book of Genesis. The rest of them are in the rest of the Old Testament. The first one is in 1 Samuel chapter 26, verse 12. And it'll say this. So David took the spear and jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a tardema, a deep sleep from the Lord, had fallen upon them. Here, what we see is that the deep sleep is explicitly from the Lord. God renders Saul and his men inactive here, right? The next one is in Job, chapter 4, verse 13. And it'll say, several of them are in the book of Job, actually. Amid thoughts from visions of the night, when tardema falls on men, when deep sleep falls on men. Now, here, the use of tardema is connected to nighttime visions and revelation. The next one is in chapter 33, verse 15 of the book of Job. And that is where it says, in a dream, in a vision of the night, when dardema falls on men, when they slumber on their beds. Again, this word is tied to dreams, to visions, and divine communication. After that, we see it in Proverbs chapter 19, verse 15, where in this sense, it utilizes it in a sort of negative sense. It'll say that slothfulness casts into a tardema, into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger there in Proverbs 19. Now, this is one of the places where this word is used in a sort of negative connotation. And it's connected to laziness and inactivity. After that, you see in Isaiah chapter 29, verse 10, where it'll say, for the Lord has poured out upon you a spirit of tardema, of deep sleep, and has closed your eyes, the prophets, and covered your heads, the seers. Here, the use of tardema describes judicial dullness or spiritual stupor that's sent by the Lord. Now, for my argument, I think the strongest supporting text, or the strongest sort of ideas that I would pull from the majority usage of this, are found in Genesis 15, verse 12, 1 Samuel 26, and Job 4 and Job 33, and also Isaiah 29 here. And I think this is why I say that tardema is a state where human agency is overwhelmed. It's suspended, or it's made passive while God acts, while he reveals, or he judges. Now that I've said all of that, let's draw some inferences. Let me show you, again, showing you my math here, right? Adam is not awake during this process. He's not awake directing it. He is not supervising the creation of the woman. Adam is not giving God instructions. He's not helping or giving him hints as to what he needs or what kind of helper he wants. That's not him, what he's doing here. God puts the man into a tardema, into a deep sleep. And while the man is passive, God builds the woman. Now, that means that the woman's identity does not come from Adam's decision. Her vocation does not come from Adam's permission. Her worth does not come from Adam's assessment of her. It comes from God, because she comes from God, just like Adam does. Adam receives her after God has formed her. His first act toward her is not command. It is recognition. He sees in her one who shares his nature, one who corresponds with him, and one without which the human calling cannot be fulfilled. So when Genesis 2 presents the woman as the man's corresponding partner, the language of a zer kenedgo, it says that she is the necessary help, not just a option, but she is the necessary thing for this vocation to take place as it is designed by God. Now, the language of Selah, what it does is it reinforces that she comes from his side. And the use of tardema in the text reinforces my point that the woman is not the man's project. She is the work of God. Adam does not create her. He doesn't define her. He doesn't authorize her vocation. Adam's participation is one of recognition when he confirms that she is bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh. Together, these details for you, what they do is they strengthen the point that I'm trying to make. And that is that the pre-fall marital dynamic is not one of rivalry. It's not one of domination. It's not one of erasure of each other's vocation and role. It's not that at all. It is ordered partnership in the shared vocation of imaging God. And in that sense, that is my position on this text. It is ordered partnership that is being disordered in light of the fall. And I'll continue to lay that out for you as we go forward here. So before the fall, what we have is distinction. We have order and we have partnership. The man and the woman are not identical, but their difference is ordered towards shared vocation, not rivalry, domination, or erasure. Now let's talk about the curse here, right? Let's talk about this distortion of the creational good that I'm referring to here. Again, hey, man, I see FTT in here. I just looked at the comments. Hey, God bless you guys. Here, let me, I forgot how to do this. Yeah, you got to put this stuff up here. Thanks, Steph. I saw that you said you were going to subscribe. Thank you. God bless you guys. God bless you. God bless you. Yeah. So let's talk about this curse and why it's significant here. Now, when we come to Genesis 3, we need to notice the pattern of judgments. The judgment did not create new realities out of nowhere. What they're doing is that they are distorting the blessings that have already been given. We see that faithfulness remains, but childbirth is now marked by pain. You see this on the screen there for you. Work remains, but the ground now brings forth things like thorns and thistles. Marriage remains, but the one flesh relationship is now marked by disordered desire and distorted rule. Now, this is important because Genesis 3 is not giving us the ideal. Genesis 3 is showing us what sin has done to the good world that God had made. Now, this means that when we arrive at Genesis 3:16, we should not immediately ask ourselves, what marital structure is God prescribing here, right? That's not the question we should ask. It should be this: what creational good is being distorted here? And I think the answer is that it's the partnership that we see in Genesis 1 and 2, specifically Genesis 2. The woman was created as the corresponding helper, remember? She's the indispensable partner in the shared image-bearing vocation. But now her orientation toward the man becomes disordered. The man was created to fulfill the human vocation with her, but now she rules over him. Now he rules over him, or her, I should say. The partnership will remain, right? That's not taken away. But what I'm saying is that it's fractured now. The vocation remains, but what I'm saying is that the relationship through which that vocation is carried out, now it has been damaged. And so that's my point here. If the desire in the text here is to be looked at correctly, we must look at it in light of its immediate context. It's existing within a text about judgments. So everything that's mentioned here is not good. But that does not settle the matter because of course, a domineering sort of desire would not be good. I would readily admit that, but that's not the point here. Because what usually ends up happening in the argument is that the woman's desire is the thing that's demonized, and the man's rule is sort of the thing that has to be done now because the woman is now acting outside of her role and place. And in that sense, it's sort of this lopsided viewpoint wherein her view, her perspective, her activity is the one thing that needs corrected, and the man's is just, it's correct from the beginning, and now it is being baptized as the correct sort of position as the Bible is concerned, and that ruling is what has always been in place, but now it's a sort of ruling that's affected by the fall. And what I'm saying is that's not the case at all. But let me get into this. Let's before I get any further into that, let's go back to teshoka. Now that's the Hebrew word for desire. Let's focus on that before I go too far forward here. Now, let's look at this desire in a fractured world. Genesis 3:16, again, it says, your desire shall be for your husband, but he shall rule over you. Now, there are different ways that people understand this phrase. Some argue that her desire is a sexual longing. There's scholars that argue that. Some argue that her desire is one of relational dependence. Now, Dr. John Walton argues that. I don't agree with him fully there, but it was actually his contributions to this conversation that made me start thinking more deeply about this text and put me on this journey to this position here, right? Others argue that it's her desire to control the husband. Now, that was, I think, for mostly argued by the scholar Susan Foe in an article that she wrote back in the Westminster Theological Journal in 1975. She wrote an article that really highlights this idea here, right? And so, in that sense, it's a desire to control the husband. Now, I want to say this carefully. The word itself does not settle the whole matter. Just because if we define the word, that does not settle this entire matter. The Hebrew word teshoka appears only 3 times in the Old Testament. It appears here in Genesis 3:16. It appears again in Genesis 4, verse 7, and it appears in Song of Solomon, chapter 7, verse 10. And back in just chapter 4, the reason why people see it as such a closely well is because you see there in chapter 4, it says this is where sin's desire is for Cain. Its desire is for him, and that he must rule over it. And so that is why they're in the minds of people that sort of conclude on this. This is why this is so so connected. And such a controlling parallel for a lot of people. And I could see why. I totally do. But in Song of Solomon, though, you have, so in chapter 4 of Genesis, let me put it like this. You have a parallel that sort of exists within, it's a close parallel. It is close lexically because the wording is like exactly the same. And so in that sense, it is a good match. But I think that also that there's some validity to closely paralleling the usage of this word with its usage in Song of Solomon, because there the concept is paralleled and it's synonymous. They're both in the concept of marriage. And so while all that being said, I guess that's why it's sort of the water is so muddy and as it relates to this, because in Song of Solomon, it says, I am my beloved's and his desire is for me. That's what it'll say there, right? Now, again, this use in Song of Solomon, it shows that the word does not automatically mean desire to dominate, and it can refer to a sort of affectionate longing. So my point in even mentioning this, thanks, Patrick. I am kind of stirring the pot, brother. Yeah, you're right. I am. But my point in mentioning all of this is that the word has to be interpreted in context, right? It has to be interpreted in context, because my argument is that Genesis 3:16 is not primarily trying to give us a psychological sort of profile of the woman. What it's doing is it's showing us what has happened to the relationship. Her desire, whatever we, I guess, whatever precise nuance we assign to this word, right? It is now operating inside of a fallen relational order. Whatever you think about the word, what I'm saying concretely in this is that it is now operating inside of this distorted, fallen relational order. And so in that sense, it is no longer functioning within the harmony that we see in Genesis chapter 2. So if we are describing it as longing, like if we were to take that view, we should not treat sentimentality. It's a fallen longing. It's desire that's now shaped by the rupture of sin. Now, this longing can practically collapse the woman's identity and vocation into the husband. Now, instead of standing with him as the corresponding partner in the shared image-bearing vocation, her orientation toward him becomes disordered in such a way that compromises the partnership. And this was the point I was trying to make with you the other day, Jason, when we were on the phone. This is the idea of why the longing now becomes, when you were like, I don't understand why that is a bad thing. That's why right there, because it can practically become her collapsing her identity into the husband when her identity needs to remain intact and distinct. Now, what I'm not saying is that she is ceasing to image God. She doesn't cease to bear that. What I'm saying is that it means the relationship through which that vocation was to be expressed is now damaged. That's my point here. Now let's move on to the Genesis 4 verse 7 parallel. And this is really going to be me interacting with the control view. This is one of the central passages that bolster up the idea of that the desire, the teshoka in Genesis 3:16 is one of the woman seeking to master the man. And so I want to interact with this view fairly here, but just quickly, because it would take a lot to do it. I may end up even writing my next article, my next exegetical article, where I lay it out even more, where you can, well, you'll see the points that I'm making here. I may end up letting that be my next article that I'm going to seek to get published about this topic here. But let me just interact with the fairly here, right? Because many interpreters will argue that the woman's desire her husband. And the strongest argument from that, or for that, comes from Genesis 4, verse 7. And that's where it says, God says this to Cain: sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Now, you see how that wording is like almost exactly similar? It's almost identical to what we've just heard in Genesis 3:16. And so the woman's desire is for her husband in Genesis 3:16, but he must rule over her. And in Genesis 4, sin's desire is for Cain, but Cain must rule over it. So the argument is that Genesis 4:7 explains Genesis 3:16. Sin's desire is to master Cain. So the woman must logic there. And I think this is a serious argument. And I don't think it should be brushed aside at all. But with that being said, I don't think it's decisive. I don't think it decisively deals with the issue that we have at hand. And the first reason is because similarity to wording does not always mean identical meaning. Context still governs usage. Context, as they say, right? The second thing is that the Hebrew word, or the same Hebrew word, it appears, again, in Song of Solomon. And there it's in a positive, romantic context. So the word itself doesn't inherently mean control. Third thing is that Genesis 3:16 is not only about the woman's desire, it is about a broken relationship. The second clause matters as well. He shall rule over you. Now, if we make this first clause about human or female control, but then we treat the second clause as a sort of male responsibility in response to it, we may end up moralizing one side of the pericope and normalizing the other side of it. But in the context of Genesis 3, both clauses are part of the judgment. Her desire is distorted. His rule is distorted. Both of them belong to the fall. So I am not denying that sin creates conflict between husbands and wives. I mean, if any of you are married in here, you know it hasn't stopped, right? You know it hasn't. Absolutely does entail that. I would say that the fall does entail a conflict between the husband and the wife. It just does. That's unavoidable. That's not up for debate. I'm saying that Genesis 3:16 is bigger than a woman trying to control a man. It is describing the breakdown of this creational partnership, this creational ordered partnership that was inaugurated and introduced to us in Genesis chapter 2. Now, what about he shall rule over you? What about that, right? The inward turn of dominion is what we're talking about here, right? It's the second half of the verse. We got to deal with it. It says, he shall rule over you. That second clause of Genesis 3:16, or this portion of Genesis 3:16. Now, this phrase is treated as if it is simply establishing male leadership in marriage. But I think we need to be careful. And I'm actually challenging that. If we're going to establish that idea and think of this verse as something that's supportive to it, I don't think it is. And that's why we need to be careful, because in Genesis 1, we already see that the language of dominion is already being used. It's already being used in Genesis chapter 1. Humanity was called to rule. But what was humanity called to rule? The fish, the birds, the animals, the earth. Now, Genesis 1 does not say that the man shall rule over the woman. Point to me where it says that. It doesn't. And I'm not trying to engage in an exact word fallacy. You can't even draw that in and sort of inferentially from Genesis 1. What you see in relation to the man and the woman is nothing but mutual dependence, mutual interdependence, I should say. That's what you see. So when we see Genesis 3:16 say that he shall rule over you, we have to think that something has now changed. Dominion, which was originally directed toward creation, it's now being redirected within the marriage relationship itself. And I think that's part of the tragedy. The man and the woman were meant to rule creation together under God. Now the man rules over the woman. The shared vocation has now been turned inward into a distorted hierarchy of domination. This does not mean that there was no order before the fall. Genesis 2 can still show order, because we still see that Adam is formed first. We still see that Adam receives the command. He receives that command concerning the tree. And this is before the woman is formed. We see that Adam names the animals. And we also know that Paul does appeal to creation order in 1 Corinthians 11 and 1 Timothy chapter 2 here, right? So I'm not saying that order itself is fallen. I'm saying that Genesis 3:16 presents rule over the woman as a fallen distortion of the pre-fall marital dynamic. I see some people commenting here. Let's see what it says here. So could it be indicating that desire without control creates relational imbalance, putting sin in the hands of the, I think you're trying to say Azair and not the lead, the helper. Honestly, what you're saying, Sister Tracy, I think I'm not saying that, but I can see why you're saying. I can see why you could be thinking it could be indicating that desire without control creates, but whose control? That would be the thing that I would really need to know before I would I think I can get behind that statement. Whose control? And then the idea of control here would be who's deciding, right? Who's deciding what the desire is? Who's defining it? And what I'm saying is that if God is that one, then yes. But if it is the man that needs to be in control and that the desire is one that is outside of that purview, then I think it's still missing the point. I still think it's missing the point. I still think it is like illegalizing one half of the verse itself and legalizing the other, or normalizing or regulating the other in a sense. I don't think that's taking place. I don't think that's what's happening here. It's not saying that woman's desire is purely to be over the man and that he must, as a result and as a response, rule over her, must establish that. I just don't think that's what's happening, because the picture in Genesis 2 is of mutual interdependence, not of domination. Now, again, like I've just argued, there are roles that we could still argue for that. We're going to get into headship and in all of that. I'm going to talk about the submission text in the New Testament. That is something I am going to talk about. And so I appreciate you commenting and just interacting. It really shows that you're trying to track with what I'm saying. And so I really appreciate that sentiment here. And so in the context of sin, she seeks to gain firsthand information outside of what she was told, maybe by Adam, concerning the fruit of that tree. The text shows her state of mind when this happens. Yes. Now, in Genesis 3, you can see that. I would agree with you that in the context of sin, or in the context of, and I think you would be right to conclude that, because in the text, she is the one outside of God that starts to declare something as good. I don't think you see Adam saying that, or being described as describing something as good like that. That's tov in the text. In Genesis 1, you see a series of events wherein God recognizes or declares that it is functioning correctly as he has designed it. That is the use of tov there. I wouldn't say that it is about anything moral. And when it says, and God saw that the light was good, or God saw that it was, and so forth, I don't think that's talking about something moral, in as much as it is talking about something functioning as he has designed it. What he put in day one is functioning as he has designed it. Day two is functioning as he has designed it. That's why when you see in Genesis 2, where it says it is not good that the man should be alone, the man is not functioning as he has been designed. That's why he needs the helper. And so in that sense, right, you could see how her description of that the tree was good or desirous to fill her belly, essentially, she is sitting in the seat that has just been occupied by God to define what is functionally right and good for humanity. Now she is. So yeah, I could see that, but that doesn't mean that she is defying Adam. See what I'm saying? She's defying God, but not Adam. She's defying God. And that's really my point here, right? So I'll get back to what I'm saying here. And I think that this difference that I'm talking about when I say ordered partnership, that's not the same thing as domination. Because this fallen distortion of the pre-fall marital dynamic is presenting itself in domination on the man's part, and I would say an abdication of the role on the woman's part. And so Genesis 2, it gives us ordered partnership. Genesis 3 gives us domination as a consequence of sin. Now, let me show you where my argument differs from, where I would agree and differ from the two major views on this text. And that's the control view and the longing view here, right? And I just want to show you how I interact with both of them. Let me go ahead and put this thing down here, right? So you guys can see what's on the screen here. Because I agree with the control view that Genesis 3:16 describes conflict after the fall. I also agree that Genesis 4 verse 7 is a important parallel, because the wording is just way too close for comfort there, right? It's way too close to ignore. The woman's desire and the man's rule are not presented in a sort of neutral setting. They appear inside the judgment scene after sin has entered the world. This is where I differ, though. I differ in that I do not think that Genesis 3:16 should be reduced to the humans or the woman's desire to control the man. I think that reading is too narrow. What it does is it can make the verse mainly about the female's psychology, when I think that the broader narrative is about the distortion of the relationship itself. And I also agree with the relational view of teshoka, right, of desire. And it does not inherently mean domination. Again, we saw in Song of Solomon how it shows that this word can refer to affectionate longing. So we got to be careful about saying that this word just means inherently, it just means control here. Where I differ, though, is that I do not want to treat the longing as though it is untouched by the fall. Genesis 3:16 is still judgment. So if desire means longing, then it's a fallen longing. It's a longing that's operating in a sort of fractured relationship now. It has become disordered now in the way that sort of functionally compromises the woman's shared vocational contribution. So my argument agrees with the control view that the verse describes post-fall conflict. It agrees with the longing view that desire need not mean domination. But what I'm doing is I'm differing from both by arguing that the main issue is the breakdown of the creational partnership that's established in Genesis chapters 1 and 2 here, right? The woman's desire is distorted. The man's rule is distorted. And together these things, they fracture the shared image bearing vocation that both the man and the woman were created to fulfill. Now, I see here. Let me see what Pat says here, right? Adam is not desiring the fruit of the tree, but Eve is. Adam is desiring her. Adam is desiring her because he listens to her concerning the tree. So both have subdued by the nakash. Yeah, that's an inference, but you don't know. We can say why Eve is desiring because the text tells us why, but you don't know why Adam. We're drawing an inference and saying that Adam is just so taken by Eve that he just takes the like that's the point you're making. But how is that in the text? I mean, I'm not saying it's a wild inference to make, but I just don't think that that's the point here. I don't think that's the point here. And so, yeah. And honestly, that's not fully interacting with what I'm talking about currently, but it is something to discuss, though. And I think that is, I think that's something that what is his name? He just passed away. Dr. Heiser. Yeah. He concludes that as it relates to Adam and Eve and this scene right here, and then the Kash and all of that with the serpent and stuff like that. But that conversation is needed to be had, but I think it needs to be had outside of our intuitive sort of understandings of the first opening chapters of Genesis, because I have found that this is a place in the Bible where people already know. They already know. And the moment you come in with something else, there's this like visceral reaction to anything different from what we've learned. And these chapters are just settled for a lot of people. And so when you come in and you start talking about different things with the serpent or different things with the proto-evangelium, the ideas of functional ontology, material ontology, old earth, young earth, science versus all these different things, people have some really strong feelings as it relates to those types of things. And so, yeah, but yeah, let's move on here though to the next slide I have up for you, because we're about an hour in and we're almost done though. I only have 12 slides. We're on slide 8 actually. So, yeah, let's talk about the disruption of the image of God a little bit more deeply. I've already been hinting at it, but I want to spend some time specifically talking about it because it is so pivotal to my point and what I'm arguing. Now, the man and the woman were not simply created for private companionship. They were created to represent God's rule in the earth. Their marriage had a vocational significance. They were to be fruitful. They were to fill the earth. They were to subdue the earth. They were to both exercise dominion, and they were to do this together. So when Genesis 3:16 fractures the relationship between the man and the woman, it also disrupts the outworking of the image of God. Do you see that now? Though the image of God remains in both of them and the vocation born from it, I mean, that still remains. But the partnership through which that vocation is lived, it becomes disordered. It becomes distorted by sin. That's why I would describe the woman's longing as a practical distortion of her vocational contribution. She still bears God's image. She still has the calling, but her orientation toward the husband is now distorted in such a way that it can functionally pull her away from standing beside him in this shared vocation. Likewise, his rule, on the other hand, his rule over her becomes a practical denial of her corresponding partnership Please hear me in this point because this is so central. His of her corresponding sort of contribution in this partnership. Instead of receiving her, it's like we saw and recognizing what God has given in her to him in her, recognizing her as this sort of necessary partner in the vocation that has been given to humanity. He ends up ruling over her. You see how that's the difference. So both sides are distorted. Her longing can become a disordered sort of dependence, and his rule can become a disordered domination. Therefore, together they did partnership. Now, let me see what Sister Jenny says here. The distortion comes from disobeying and removing their trusting. Amen. It does. It's like Adam sits on the side of and sees Eve, sits on one side of Eve, and she saw, and Eve sits on the other. God in the middle. It's the balance. Without God, there is. Yeah, I agree with you. Without God, there is unbalance. I Okay. Well, hello. I don't know what just happened. My I don't know what this will do to the live stream itself. Um man. Are you guys still here with me? I see it says two people. Um I don't know. But my internet just like it just stopped working altogether. It just stopped. And so yeah. Please start away. Where okay. Yeah, here's what I'll do. Man, the video is still going. Yeah. Yep. I was frozen. Okay. Let me go ahead and re-pull up my slide deck for you guys. That's what I'm gonna end up doing. I think what it's going to do is it's going to continue to keep the slideshow because I see the timer still going at an hour and 9 minutes. And so we were on this slide right here. We were talking about Kenneth Bailey and his idea here. Hold on. Yes, I am back. I am back here. Thank you. Man, I think that what was that like a 5 minute little what do they call it? Little interlude. It was. Well, we're going to get right back into Kenneth Bailey's argument here, and I'm going to show you why it's so significant to what I'm currently trying to say here. Now, Paul to the curse in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. He doesn't appeal to the curse there. He does not say that the man shall rule over the woman. What Paul does is he appeals to creation. This is why the earlier discussion of Avad and Shamar really mattered. Because if Genesis 2:15 gives Adam a vocation to serve and to guard human or to guard sacred space, then Genesis and if Genesis 2 verse 18, if it presents the woman as his corresponding helper because the man should not be alone, then Paul's appeal to Genesis 2 and 1 Corinthians 11 is not merely about who came first. People try to reduce it to that, but it's not only about that. It's not merely about it. It is about the recovery of the mutual dependence within the vocation that God has given humanity. And notice how the new creation is now the place where that vocation is to be lived out. And so you would see a sort of picking up of the mantle that you see in Genesis 2. Jesus picks it up, renews humanity, and now in the Lord all things are from God. Or in the Lord the man is like this, in the Lord the woman is like this. You see how it's sort of answering, and I'm going to show you, it's going to be answering the fall itself. Now that's an easy concept to get behind. Of course, Jesus's work is answering the fall, and we know that. Like nobody's gonna disagree with me on that statement. But my point in saying that is people start getting really wishy-washy when it comes to, okay, well, I mean, if the song says that he comes to make his blessings flow as far as the curse is found, well, then why are we trying to keep some of the curse and baptize it as if it is the creational ideal for marital relationships? That's my point here right now. What Bailey's reading helps us do here, it helps us see that Paul is refusing to let origin become superiority. Paul speaks of woman from man, but then he immediately balances that statement. Paul will say this: nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor man of woman. For as woman was made from man, so now man is born of woman, and all things are from God. That's verses 11 through 12 of 1 Corinthians 11. Now, the nevertheless is doing a lot of work here. It's very important. Paul acknowledges origin in this text, but he refuses to turn origin into superiority. Woman came from man, but now every man comes through woman. And again, all things are from God. What Dr. Bailey sees here is he sees Paul as restoring mutual dependence within creation order. Now, this is not merely about allowing women to participate in worship. It's beyond that. It's not just merely allowing them, it's ensuring that they are part of worship. It's about the full human worship before God. And that means that women must be a part of it. Male worship is not self contained, female worship is not derivative. In the Lord, man is not independent of woman, and woman is not independent of man. And what this does, it helps my argument because Paul does not use Genesis 3 as the model for redeemed relationships. He returns to Genesis 2. He returns to creation. He returns to mutual dependence, and he returns to this ordered partnership that I'm arguing for. So if Paul's theological instinct is to go back to Genesis 2, then Genesis 3 should not be treated as the permanent ideal. Genesis 3 is the breakdown or the brokenness of the ideal. And redemption addresses that brokenness, addresses that distortion. Now, what about headship? Because we got to talk about it. I can already tell, because I already know where the question goes next. If I bring this up, people are going to talk about, well, what about Ephesians 5, Colossians, where Paul elsewhere in 1 Timothy, and what Peter talks about in 1 Peter 3. Like, what about those submission texts, Rick? Have you read those? Yes, I have. We're going to deal with them right here. Because if Genesis 3 describes distortion rather than design, then what do we do with these New Testament passages that call wives to submit to their husbands? And that is a fair question to ask. Ephesians 5. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord in chapter 5, verse 22. And in Colossians 3, Paul will say, wives, submit to your own husbands or to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord in Colossians 3:18. In 1 Peter 3, verse 1, Peter will say, likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands. So I got to be clear. I'm not afraid to be at all in this moment. Genesis 3:16 does not erase those texts. It doesn't act like they're not there. I don't pretend that these passages aren't actually saying what they're saying. What I'm also not doing, I'm not settling or attempting to settle the entire complementarian, egalitarian debate by itself. I'm not trying to do that. What I'm trying to do is this. I'm trying to say that Genesis 3:16 should not be used as the foundation for, or as a foundation, maybe not the, but as a foundation for male rule over women. If someone wants to argue for marital order or submission or headship, that argument needs to be grounded in creation and redemption, not in the curse. Genesis 3:16 says, he shall rule over you. But when the New Testament addresses husbands, it never commands us to rule our wives. Instead, the New Testament gives commands to wives concerning submission. And then it gives husbands commands concerning things like love, gentleness, honor, and understanding. That's why Ephesians will go on to say, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her in verse 25. Colossians 3:19 will say, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Peter will go on to say, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel in verse 7 there. So whatever we say about submission, we cannot simply carry Genesis 3:16 forward and call it Christian marriage. The husband's pattern is not a cursed rule. It can't be that. His pattern is Christ-like love in the new creation. Well, that means that submission in the New Testament must be read through Christ and not through the curse. Submission does not authorize domination in this sense. It does not imply inferiority on the part of the women. It does not make the husband a sort of little Christ or a little Messiah in the home. The husband is called to imitate Christ, not just Not just that in particular, but in particular this, to imitate Christ's self-giving love, not to occupy Christ's sovereign seat. That's not what it is. And this is why Ephesians 5, it matters so deeply to this part of the discussion, because Paul frames the household in the fear of Christ. Before he addresses wives and husbands, he says this: submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. That's Ephesians 5, verse 21. Then he speaks to wives. Then he speaks to husbands. But when he addresses husbands, he does not say rule. He commands us to love. And the model of that love is the crucified Jesus Christ, who gives himself for his bride. So if Genesis 3:16 describes the man ruling over the woman as a consequence of sin, Ephesians 5 does not tell husbands to preserve that rule. If what it does is it calls us husbands to a sort of cruciform love that resists domination, that does not want to even engage in it. Within this framework, the submission passages are not calling wives to live under the curse, the women to do that. They are calling wives to live within the household under the lordship of Jesus Christ. And to do so in such a way that honors order, but does not surrender the woman's image-bearing dignity or vocational partnership and contribution. Submission is not the woman stepping out of her vocation. It is not the erasure of her agency. It is not the husband absorbing her calling into himself. It isn't any of that. I think it is one of the expressions of Christian order within marriage. And it's supposed to be bounded by allegiance to Christ and paired with the husband's obligation to give himself up for her in costly love. So if we're going to use the language of headship, we must define it through Jesus Christ. The husband is not called to rule over his wife as the curse describes. He is called to love her as Christ loved the church, not giving, not considering himself, but giving himself for her. So in that sense, the submission passages do not preserve this distorted image, this distorted partnership that we see in Genesis chapter 3. What they do is they show how redeemed households begin to resist that distortion. The wife's submission resists rivalry, disorder, and self-protective grasping. The husband's self-giving love resists domination, harshness, and cursed rule. Together, both commands aim at household life under Christ, where order serves love and love protects the dignity and vocation of the other. Now, that has implications for this complementarian and egalitarian debate. I'm not going to be unaware of that. It does, absolutely does. And let me just make an appeal to my complementarian friends, to my complementarian brothers and sisters, and I'll make an appeal to my egalitarian brothers and sisters as well. I want to say this to you complementarian brothers and sisters. If you believe that Scripture teaches marital order or headship, then the strongest version of that argument should be made from creation and redemption, not from the distortions that are named in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. Now, I know that many careful complementarians already recognize that when it says that he shall rule over you, that it belongs to the judgment after the fall. And I agree with that instinct. But Genesis 3:16 describes this damage that sin brings into this relationship. And it should not be treated as the model that he holds out for us as husbands and for wives. That's not what's going on in this text. So the question is not whether the Scripture speaks of order. And I don't think that's the right category to sort of look at it, because it's not for debate. The Scripture does speak of order. The real question is, where is that order grounded and what shape is it supposed to take? Because if it is grounded in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, then it must account for shared image bearing, shared vocation, the woman as the corresponding helper that's necessary for the man. and the mutual dependence that's later echoed by Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. So whatever one concludes about headship, Genesis 3:16 should function as a warning about the corruption of marriage after sin, not as the pattern of redeemed marriages that we are called to imitate. And so to my egalitarian brothers and sisters, I want to be fair as well. I want to say this. Much of what I am arguing for kind of overlaps with the concerns that you may have. And I think that you've rightly emphasized in your arguments. Genesis 3:16 should not be treated as God's ideal for marriage. The rule of the man over the woman belongs to the damage sin brings into that relationship. Male and female together bear the image of God. And together they receive this vocation to fill, to subdue, to rule creation under God. Now, I can't be dismissing the egalitarian concern, and people shouldn't, because I think that concern helps us see that Genesis 3:16 is judgment. It's not prescription. Where the discussion remains is Genesis 1 and 2. That's where it really remains. Does creation establish only shared vocation and mutuality, or does it establish some kind of ordered relationship before the fall? That is the real point of disagreement, actually. So my argument is not that egalitarians ignore scripture or flatten text. The stronger way to say this for me is that egalitarians rightly identify Genesis 3:16 as a fallen distortion, while I still want to ask whether Genesis 2 presents ordered partnership prior to sin. Because if it does, then redemption does not erase order. It restores order without domination. So my aim here is much more laserly focused. I don't think laserly is even a word, but I think you get my point. It's more focused. I'm not claiming that Genesis 3:16 solves the whole debate. I'm not claiming that at all. I'm claiming that Genesis 3:16 should not be used to normalize domination. If someone wants to argue for complementarianism, you got to do so without baptizing the curse. If you want to argue for egalitarianism, then you still have to explain why Paul's appeal to creation order takes place in 1 Corinthians 11, 1 Timothy 2. You got to explain that. And this also means that we need to avoid another common mistake, right? These common mistakes that are made, we need to avoid them in this kind of conversation. And that's collapsing household order and church order into one category. Now, those categories are absolutely related, but they're not identical. The household texts addressed husbands and wives. We saw them already. We got Ephesians 5, Colossians 3, 1 Peter 3, and they speak of marriage and household conduct there. They address wives in relation to their own husbands and husbands in relation to their own wives. Now, the New Testament does not command wives to submit, or women to just submit to men in general. It doesn't tell them to do that. It commands wives to do that, and to do so to their own husbands. Now, church order passages, they deal with a different question altogether. Texts like 1 Corinthians 11, 1 Corinthians 14, 1 Timothy 2, 1 Timothy 3, and Titus chapter 1, what they're doing in that text, they are addressing worship, they're addressing teaching, office, order, and authority in the gathered community. Now, those conversations, again, they overlap, but they should not be collapsed into each other. A wife's submission to her husband does not automatically mean that every woman stands under the authority of every man in the church. That does not make any sense. What that would do is it would take a household command and turn it into a universal gender hierarchy. Likewise, church office cannot be settled merely by appealing to household codes. If someone wants to argue for male-only eldership, that argument has to be made from church order texts themselves, not simply from wives submit to your own husbands. Now, some complementarian arguments move too quickly. They move too quickly from household order to church order. They treat the wife's submission, so to speak, to her husband, right, They treat it as though it automatically established this general male authority rule that's over women in church. And I think that move needs more argument. That needs a clearer demonstration in the text. It is just merely asserted because whatever reason I don't want to I don't know. People's motivation why they're doing it. I don't want to get into that because I don't know. But I just seem to think that this desire to want to read it this way, again, I think it is bound up in this sinful desire that we have uh, to create division. Like, there's one thing we know how to do very well as human beings is divide. We know how to divide. And part of the ways in which we describe or express that, display, that's a better word. Part of the ways in which we display this ability, this masterful ability to divide with one another, is we create hierarchy. And we take hierarchy and we make it into something that is in the service of our ability to divide. And so I seem to think that this impulse of moving too quickly between the church order and the household order passages is as a result of our own human tendency to just seek that division. We just do. And so we need to be more careful. And I think that that move that is a part of the reasoning on that side of the argument, it needs more argument. And by more argument, I don't mean people going back and forth. I mean that side articulating it better and not just merely asserting it. Now, some egalitarian movements and arguments, they move too quickly as well in the other direction. They argue that if Genesis 3:16 is fallen domination, then all gendered order that we see in both marriage and in the church must be erased. But again, that move needs more argument as well. So the distinction needs to be maintained. Marriage order must be interpreted through creation in Christ. Church order must be interpreted through apostolic teachings, apostolic instruction concerning worship, teaching, the offices in the church, and the gathered body as a whole. And so they may inform each other, but one should not swallow the other up. So my claim is not that Genesis 3:16 settles every question about women in ministry, or women in eldership, women preaching or teaching, or church authority. My claim, again, is more focused than that. Genesis 3:16 should not be used as the foundation for household domination or order, or church order, I should say. If we're going to be talking about marriage, we need to deal carefully with the household texts. If we're talking about church order, we need to deal carefully with the church order texts. But in either case, we should not make the curse the foundation for Christian obedience. And I think both sides can agree on this, that Genesis 3:16 is not the picture of the redeemed marriage. I think it's the diagnosis of the fallen marriage. And that's and in light of this, I also have to say that the New Testament is not afraid to speak of submission. It's like that's not up for debate. The idea that women are to submit to men in the marriage, that's not up for debate here, right? Now, what that means and how that sort of is expressed, that is up for debate. But the fact that it says it is not. And I think that the real issue is whether we interpret submission through the man's cursed rule or through Jesus Christ's self-giving love that we see in Ephesians 5. Which one is going to govern that as far as the new creation is concerned? And I think that's pretty obvious when I put it that way. What I'm arguing is that Genesis 3:16 describes this distortion that Christ came to redeem, not the household pattern that Christians are called to reproduce. So yes, wives are addressed in the New Testament and husbands are addressed in the New Testament, and the household is addressed and ordered under Christ. But the order of the Christian household must never be confused with the disorder of the cursed, because in Christ, order is not domination. Headship is not tyranny. Submission is not the erasure of the individual. And marriage is not the preservation of Genesis 3:16. It is one arena where the redeeming work of Christ begins to undo what sin has fractured. Let's see here. Hold on. All right. Now, let me just clarify even more what I am not saying. I hate that I have to do this, but when you're interacting on the internet like this, people will hear everything that you did not say. And yeah, since that's what happens. And I'll like, I made a video the other day. I was interacting with a post that a woman made. She has a PhD in leadership, as I understand it. She calls herself a leadership scientist, and she was making some conclusions. She's making some assertions on the concept of sin, and was arguing from the bare lexical definition of hamartano in the Greek, which is the Greek word for sin there. And she was saying that, well, this word literally means to miss the mark. Therefore, that's all that sin is. It's just to miss the mark. And so when I make a mistake, I'm not trying to be evil. I'm just wrong. And so I'm not evil. And so this whole idea that sin is evil, and that, guilt and conviction and confess, like, that whole paradigm needs to be relooked at, because sin is not that. And so what I was saying there was like, yo, like, you're arguing from this bare lexical definition, and you're not recognizing that this word exists within a context. Its definition is in its usage, not just in its bare sort of lexical semantical range. It can't be that. And I acknowledged, because he was saying this in light of how she has gone through a lot of things in the church. And what I did not want to do was demonize or delegitimize the church hurt that is possibly there. I just want to take her on face value and just believe that this had taken place on to her, and just acknowledge. So I spent a lot of time acknowledging that. I spent a lot of time explaining why I'm interacting, what I'm not saying. I did all of that, right? And the commentary, as a result, that interacted with it was just like nobody watched it. It was impugning my motives, even though I am describing what my motivations are. I even mentioned the very thing and saying, I'm not doing this. And that was what was told to me. But I'm saying all that to say this, that the internet is a crazy place, and a lot of people would do well to learn how to listen and interact really well. That text in the scripture where it says, be slow to speak and quick to hear, quick to listen, is so powerfully instructive, so needful. And especially when we're going to interact in a place like this on the internet, we need that. So let me just clarify what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that there are no distinctions between men and women. I'm not saying that there is no order in creation. I'm not saying that women loses her image-bearing vocation, or the man loses his accountability. I'm not saying that Genesis 3:16 settles every question about church order, women in ministry, or the entire complementarian egalitarian debate. Now, that quickly dealt with that. Now let me just do this for you, right? Just bring this whole argument, everything that I've said, we bring it all together for you. Genesis 1 gives male and female a shared image-bearing vocation. That would be sort of premise 1 of my argument. Premise 2 would be Genesis 2 shows that this vocation is carried out through ordered partnership. Premise 3, Genesis 3 shows that sin distorts every creational blessing, with the conclusion being, therefore, Genesis 3:16 should be read as the distortion of the male and female partnership, not as the institution of God's ideal for marriage, because her desire becomes disordered. His rule becomes domination. The woman is no longer related to as the corresponding partner in the shared vocation. The man is no longer exercising responsibility in such a way that preserves the partnership, that honors that partnership. The result then is a fractured marriage and a damaged vocational outworking of the image of God. That is why I believe that the desire to control, that reading is too narrow. It may capture one possible expression of fallen desire, but it cannot fully account for the narrative flow of Genesis 1 and 2. I think it breaks from it, actually. Genesis 3:16 is not merely about a woman trying to control a man. It is about the collapse of the creational partnership that God has given and God has authored and defined and designed. And that is why the New Testament does not call the church to imitate Genesis chapter 3. It calls us back toward creation as it is being restored in Jesus Christ. And we know this, that woman came from man, as the text says in Genesis 2. Now man comes through woman, and all things are from God. That is the balance that I'm trying to preserve here. Now, my last appeal is to those who want to interact with me on this. And I want to make it very simple. Interact with the arguments that I've actually made. If you disagree, do not reduce this to, well, Rick, you just deny submission, because I have not denied that in the New Testament. I've not denied the New Testament submission text. Don't reduce what I'm saying to, well, Rick, you deny order in creation. I don't want to hear that, because I've argued that Genesis 2 matters. Don't reduce what I'm saying again to this, I'm just making an egalitarian argument, because I have also said that egalitarians still need to deal carefully with Paul's appeal to creation in the text that he does it to in 1 Corinthians 2, or I'm sorry, 1 Timothy 2 and 1 Corinthians 11 in particular, right? 1 Corinthians 15, Paul will appeal to creation there as well when he talks about Adam was formed first and became, or Adam was formed and became that life. I forget the phrase in there, but Paul will appeal to creation there, right? I'm not going to deny that. And so don't reduce my interaction here to that. And also don't reduce my interaction to that. I think that complementarians just, believe just abruptly in the idea of domination. Like that's their whole point. Now, I will say that there are ideas of complementarianism that are just truly just patriarchal. And I think that is patriarchalism is complementarianism to its fullest extent. Like if you walk it all the way out, you're going to get patriarchalism. They're within the same sort of family, but they are absolutely distinct from one another. And I think complementarianism is something that is a viable option as it relates to these relationships and how we should govern them and how we think about church polity and so on and so forth. As much as I think that egalitarianism has its own sort of value, but patriarchalism, patriarchy, is just not it at all. Like you're not in the conversation. You don't get a seat at the table as if you have some viable position to sort of be there. I think this is just men trying to just be in charge because they want to be. That's all that is. And oddly enough, you find a lot of these tendencies in the good old place of Christian nationalism. That's where you find a lot of people who are patriarchalist. Joel Webben is a patriarchalist. Stephen Wolfe, patriarchalist. What's the other guy? Got a kind of a fat guy, looks like Santa Claus. Thinks he's funny. I can't think of his name. Doug Wilson, that's his name. He's a patriarchalist. There's a lot of these men that are Dale Partridge or Partridge, whatever his name is. The guy's always saying crazy stuff on X. Patriarchalist. Pastor Brian, patriarchalist. These guys, they're all Christian nationalists. All of them are. And they think that women should just be sitting in the house, pregnant, barefoot, and at the oven, right? I don't think that's the case. I think that sort of idea, like you're already heretical because you're a Christian nationalist. So you're already wrong. And so the point of what I'm trying to say is That ain't it. That ain't in this conversation. You're outside of it and you're wrong. We're in the complementarian and egalitarian. If we're going to talk about the debate, I think that is something as an in-house debate between Christians. And I think one side can take it to an extreme and be wrong, and so can the other side and be wrong. And that's what I've tried to do, is not simply make you have to agree with one or the other. I wanted to present how both of these sides of the argument use this text, and to really articulate to you that I think that both of them are using it wrong, and that we can look at it in a better way. And so that's why the question I was asking was just more focused. I asked, should Genesis 3:16 be treated as the foundation for Christian marriage? Or should it be read as a diagnosis of what sin has done to marriage? And I think if you can recognize, I've been arguing for the latter. Genesis 3:16 describes the rupture. Christ calls us toward that redemption, though. So if we're going to defend order, let it be shaped by creation and redeemed in Jesus Christ. But if we're going to speak about headship, then we got to let it look like cruciform love, not cursed rule. If we're going to talk about submission, then it has to be bounded by allegiance to Jesus Christ first, not swallowed up by domination. And if we're going to debate these things, then we must do so with the whole Bible open. We must have Genesis 1 in mind, Genesis 2, Genesis 3, 1 Corinthians 11, Ephesians 5, Colossians 3, 1 Peter 3, 1 Timothy 2, 1 Timothy 3, and the rest of the apostolic witness and the larger Old Testament witness as it relates to these things. Because in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor man of woman, right? And all things are from God. And so with that said, that is the argument. We did so with a technical difficulty in the middle. I hope that didn't throw you off too much. It threw me off, as I was like, what the heck's going on? And then the screen just went blank. And yeah, so I think I need to call Spectrum and let them know that their internet sucks. But yeah, if there are any questions to what I've covered here, please put them in the comments. For those of you that have stuck with me this long, I'd like to interact with you. And if you're going to interact, put a question there so I know you're asking one. If you're going to push back, which is fine too, indicate that you're pushing back, and we can interact. I'll wait here for about maybe 5 minutes. And yeah. What are your questions? Oh, he said, no, we didn't hear the Kenneth Bailey part. Oh, I think I explained it. I'm looking at the comments now. Yeah, technology is so annoying. Yeah, okay, let's see here. Question, could you explain one more time why the word desire is a bad thing as far as the woman is concerned? Okay, why it is a bad thing, it is because it is in light of the consequences of sin. So what I'm saying is that sin has distorted everything that Christ or that God has ordered in Genesis 1 and 2. Sin has disordered it. And in particular, as it relates to what Genesis 3 is, notice how it is specifically targeting the very things that were commanded of them, that they were commissioned to do. They are the blessings in the text. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. The woman is now given the consequence of itzavon. Now, I didn't cover this in the presentation, but itzavon is this. It's the word that's used there in your English translation. You'll see it says pain in childbearing, right? Now, there's a debate whether the word for childbearing means like just giving birth or the entirety of the journey of pregnancy from conception to the birth and all of that. that's still up for debate. So that is contested, but itzavon is not, right? And that is that word that's given to the man. It's the same Hebrew word. So, but it's translated as toil as it relates to the man, but it's translated as pain as it relates to the woman. But I think what it should be is translated as difficulty across the board. Difficulty in childbearing. And I think childbearing should just be the entirety of the whole process. Getting pregnant is a part of it too, right? And in that sense, I don't think it would be painful at all. Because that ain't painful. I think for the woman, giving birth is. I haven't done that, but yeah, that is painful. The point I'm trying to make is this: is that this word here is describing particularly how sin is affecting the very blessings that the humanity has been given here, right? You see that in it being targeted on the woman's ability to give birth, and you see that play out. The woman, not just to give birth, but to get pregnant. You see that play out in many of the matriarchs that we see in the rest of the book of Genesis. Why are they barren? Why? That's itzavon. The difficulty to get pregnant. And you even recognize that in Eve's words, in particular, in Eve's words in Genesis chapter 4. Let me go ahead and turn to it here. Some of these other passages I had on the screen, but these other ones, when you ask questions like this, and I love people when they ask questions like this. I got to pull them up in the actual text that I have in front of me. So give me a second to turn for it. And it says, now Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Now, you see how her declaration there is that she recognizes that her ability to conceive is as a result of God helping her. So it's almost as if she's recognizing this itzavon is affecting her ability to even become pregnant or to be fruitful and multiply, because the fruitful and multiplication that humanity is supposed to engage in can't happen without her. So if she can't get pregnant because of the difficulty, the itzavon that has now been visited upon mankind as a result of their failure to agree and obey with God and the Garden of Eden, then again, it starts to make sense as to why itzavon is more than just pain. It's more than just pain there, right? And so why is this desire a bad thing? The desire itself is one of it's one that frustrates her creational design. She's supposed to stand next to the man as they do the work. But now this desire is one of, it could be one to sort of stand outside of that vocation in being domineering, or it could be in I'm just gonna just be lovingly underneath you. I'm gonna outsource what I'm supposed to do, and you do. I just follow, right? It could be any of those things. And the reason why I'm saying that is because you see this word tashoka, how it's used in the text, and it means in those different directions. But what I'm saying in particular, why the desire is bad, is because now the desire is framed inside the sinful condition. And so that's the point, what I'm trying to say. Did I answer your question? I'll wait for you to re-answer here in the comments, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to what Steph says. And when I see your comment there, if I need some more explanation or you need more of it, then yeah, just come on and let me know. Okay, it does help you. Good. That's good to hear. Awesome. It makes sense that it would be toil or difficulty for both. Prior to the fall, I imagine both cultivating the land, bearing children would be quite easy and natural. Yeah. I mean, that's the point. I think I have a video on where I talk about Genesis 2 in particular, and the video is entitled "When Words Preach," and where I talk about in that video where Moses is preaching a sort of silent sermon with the sounds of the words themselves. Now, you might hear me say that and be like, "Well, okay, what the heck? What's the significance of saying that?" Well, when you hear it in Hebrew, right, the concept of naked, the Hebrew words, they're not the same words, but they sound exactly the same. In Genesis 2:15, the last verse, it says, and the man and the woman were both naked and were not ashamed. That's what it'll say, right? Let me go ahead and just make sure. I read Genesis so much that I could just spot it off my head, but I don't want to do that. Let me go ahead and read it. In particular, the last two says, and the man and his wife, yeah, I'm glad I read it, were both naked and were not ashamed. The Hebrew word for naked there is erumim. Sound at the end of it because it's plural of them. But the word for naked there is arum, right? Now, if you look at the next verse after Genesis 2, which is Genesis 3, verse 1, uses the same sounding word there to describe the serpent himself. Now, the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. Now, where it says the serpent was more crafty, that is the Hebrew word for that sounds like this, erum. See how it sounds the same? It's a different word. Now, this word is it's an amoral word, right? That it rendered as prudent, like it. You'll see it rendered in the book of Proverbs in many places. You'll see erum as prudent, or it can be rendered as crafty or devious or scrupulous or something like that, right? It could be those types of things. It all depends on how it is used in the context of. And so what's happening here is when the man and the women are in right relationship with God, they are erum, and that nakedness is marked by unashamedness. I hope I said that right. Unashamedness. It's marked by that. But when they confront and listen to the serpent, who is arum, which is representative of wisdom outside of relationship, what does it result in? Let's continue to read in Genesis 3 here. What does it say? I don't know why I keep closing this book up as if I'm not going to keep reading from it. But what does it say in Genesis 3? It says this. Oh, man. All right. Genesis 3, verse 7 says, then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were erum. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. Now, the word changes. It's not the same word that you see in Genesis chapter 2, verse 25. It's the same exact word that's used in Genesis 3, verse 1, is used in Genesis 3, verse 7. And so, as I told you, that this erum, this nakedness that the serpent represents, is wisdom outside of relationship. He's offering that. If you want to know what the difference between good and evil, which is another way of saying to be wise, do it on your own. And what ends up happening is they find out, they get more knowledge, they see more, but they know less. That's what I even say in that video, if I remember correctly. They end up seeing more, but they know less now. They do not no longer know experientially or continue to experience the relationship that they had with God. They stop knowing that because it's gone now. And now they see what life is to be looked at, or how it is to be lived outside of this necessary relationship that humanity must have, and that is right relationship with God. So when humanity tries to strike out on their own, apart from the relationship, it results in a nakedness that creates division, creates shame, creates all of the itzavon, the difficulty. So life outside of the presence of God, it's itzavon. It's difficulty. It's toil. That's why Solomon will say this in the book of Ecclesiastes. Let me go ahead and turn to it real quick. He'll start off in the book of Ecclesiastes saying this. In the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to its place where it rises. The wind blows to the south, and so on and so forth. He continues on. And then he'll end in verse 11 there, this portion of it, where it says, there is no remembrance of the former things, nor will there be any remembrance of the latter things, yet to be among those who come after. The point is he's just like, look, I'm the king of Israel, king over all Israel. And what's the point of all this? What's the point of all this toil? I gain stuff, and then I gain all this wealth, and then I die and somebody else spends it. Like, what's the point? That's what life is like outside of an unhindered relationship, human relationship with God. That's what it is. It's toil, it's pain, it's difficulty, it's asking the question and not really getting a comfortable answer of why am I here? What is my purpose? Humanity cannot find that out outside of a relationship with God. It's almost as if you're trying to plot the coordinates on the graph, but you're starting from -1. You're always going to be off. You have to start from the 0 point and then plot in the negative y-axis or so on and so forth. I'm not a math guy, but I think you get what I'm saying. It'll just always start off in the wrong position here. But yeah, are there any other questions? Well, man, I thank you guys for hanging in with me for 2 hours. Again, through that difficulty that we had with the technology here. My internet's sucking. But we're back on and we're doing it. I will wait for another 2 minutes. If nobody has any questions, I will go ahead and sign off. Any questions? I'm interested to see how this will look because I've never had a live stream. I usually don't live stream. I usually pre-record these things. But I had pre-recorded this, and then when I went to look at it, right, it was like all choppy or something like that. It would like skip, and for the first couple of times, I was like, yeah, I can get over it. People will, but then it just kept doing it. I'm like, this is not it. And then we get on live, and then it cuts out. So I don't know, but yeah. But look, guys, I thank you for joining me, and until next time, go with God. God bless you. And let's have this conversation with Jesus in the room. Here's what I mean by that. You know, I've been working through a series called A Theology of Disagreement. And just to be very concise here, when I say the statement that we need to have the conversation as if Jesus is in the room, what I mean is when we're having a discussion, we're having a debate, we're having a disagreement, then we must do so in light of the fact of what Jesus has done. If we're both Christians and we're disagreeing about something, but we're all Christian though, and we're disagreeing about it, we have to have the discussion. So I'm still advocating for the fact that we have the discussion. Whatever the discussion is, we still should have it. But we got to have it in light of the tomb being empty. You have to. It's just like the song says, he comes to make his blessings flow as far as the curse is found. Well, yep. It's found that out. Even the places where we disagree, even how we disagree. Everything that we do as Christians must be looked at and filtered through the reality that Jesus Christ is alive and well today. And since that is true, we cannot be the same. We cannot be the same as the world. We have to be different because that's true. So with that said, God bless you. I'll see you next time. To cede any ground to liberal theology as if this is just a moral story. How long, O Lord? To the Lord, the sojourner matters. Will determine the definition of a word by its context. We speak because silence is not morally neutral.
Shalom. Shalom.